Everybody forgets there's a thing roaming around called the devil. He wants to steal, kill, and destroy.
I've seen a lot. Seen a lot of murders, but I've never seen that kind of torture.
There were several deaths that were very, very suspicious.
She was adamant that she did not do this crime.
It's horrible to think sisters who were so close would act this way. It's just horrifying.
That's totally depraved. It's not a pretty death. This one, you're gonna feel it for a while.
I always thought of Twin Lakes as being a quiet area, just mainly families living there. The victim lived in this quiet home, this nice neighborhood where everybody knew each other. Everybody was friends, everybody went fishing together in the little lakes. It's just sad that the whole thing had to go down the way that it did. It's early January 1993. I was a homicide detective for the Little Rock Police Department. I worked a lot of murders, and especially in the time frame that this one happened, Little Rock was having a lot of gang-type drive-by murders. This was not anything like that. What started this case out was the victim was taken to the local hospital here in Little Rock with severe stomach pain, flu-like symptoms, possibly some kind of severe stomach virus. The doctors were trying to do everything they could. They, initially thinking it was the flu. They were trying to treat it like that. Symptoms continued to get worse, and eventually a doctor asked the family, is there a possibility there could have been a poisoning? And the family said yes. 2 days later, victims passed away, so now it's a homicide investigation. As we started investigating this case, we realized we had to go back and look over decades to really understand what was going on.
We're driving through the town of Powen, Arkansas. Not a real busy town, but that's why people come to live here. It's a town of about 290 people, about an hour southwest of Little Rock, the state capital. Yeah, we just drove through it. We're done. We'll turn around someplace. That's funny. That was it. I mean, it's not a half-a-mile piece of road. Really peaceful cemetery right off the highway here. Okay, guys, this is it. This is where our story begins. It's the Plummer family. The mother's Bertie Plummer. The dad's George. We know they got married probably in the 20s, 80 years ago.
My grandpa George was a hard worker and an entrepreneur. He owned his own sawmill, kind of like Little House on the Prairie type stuff, from what I gather. My grandma, Bertie, they sharecropped a lot when they were young. She told me that the reason why those country women had those dresses, besides the obvious, is they couldn't afford to go to the bathroom in the field, so they would just prostrate themselves over that old bucket, and the females would actually pee in the bucket and then carry on going to work.
The townspeople in Powen knew the Plummer family, and they kind of knew that something wasn't right with the mom. Bertie had probably what we know now as bipolar disorder, then they called it manic depressive illness.
I just didn't know she wasn't all there. I thought she was just a sweet old lady. My grandpa would find her out in the woods, running out in the woods, hiding from somebody. I don't know who that somebody was, but she had her own demons, I guess.
The Plummer family was a family of 12, 10 children. There are 5 boys and 5 girls in this family. Opal was the oldest, and then Eveline, Jeannie, Elsie, and Georgia.
Gina and Georgie both were my favorite aunts. Jean was the older one and Georgie was the younger one. They were both funny and witty, but Aunt Georgie could charm the warts off a frog. She had a way of charming people and getting their way. Georgie was beautiful, and I probably had a crush on her at 10 years old or something. She was beautiful and funny. I think Jean, she's more practical, but both of them very smart. I love them both dearly.
They were very fun to be around. They would play cards, and Jeannie was very, very friendly. Georgia, too, was funny. They laughed a lot. They were very, very, very close.
1952 was kind of a pivotal year for the Plummer family. George passes away from cancer. Jeannie ran off and married Jimmy Allen. He works for the railroad, makes a good living. And then Georgia, at the time, was 14. So Jeannie's 18, Georgia's 14. She drops out of 8th grade and she runs off and she gets married. She ran into the arms of a man she thought who could take care of her. His name is Bobby Lingo. Georgia and Bobby Lingo had children immediately. In fact, she was 15 when their son was born. Their son's name is a stereotypical Arkansas name, Billy Bob. So by 15, she's a mother, and she realized she couldn't take it anymore, thinking, I don't want to take care of this child. It was just something she really couldn't handle. So Georgia at that time left her family. So Georgia needs a place to stay. She then has to go look for one of her sisters, see if they could help her out. And she moves in with Jeannie and Jimmy Allen and their son, Buddy. When Georgia first moved in with Jeannie and Jimmy Allen, she and Jeannie started hitting the town. They found the clubs to go to. They went to the dog track. Jeannie loved this life. This was a life she had never really been afforded because remember, she was at home in Poen and she's come to Little Rock. And so now she's living it up, thinking this is so fun. She looks to Georgia. Georgia's the pretty sister of these girls. Georgia gets all the attention when they go out. Jeannie's the sensible one. So Georgia looked at Jeannie thinking, oh, you've got the perfect life. You've got a husband who makes a good living. You've got a beautiful brick home. That's the life I want. Jeannie looks at Georgia and says, you look cute in a pencil skirt, and let's go out and party. And she wants the life that Georgia has.
The girls were social girls. They did like to party.
They stayed up most of the evening gambling, just penny ante poker, and they just had a blast doing that.
Jimmy Allen wasn't having it. He wasn't having a wife that was going to run around town. That's just not the type of man he was.
I wouldn't like any old wild girl, sister or not, coming and taking my wife away from me. I'll put the question to you. Would you like your wife going out with her crazy sister to bars and stuff on Saturday night? Hello?
Probably not.
So we can agree on that.
Jeannie probably knew that Georgia wasn't best for her, but she had to accommodate the fact that that's her sister. Yet she comes home every day to her husband who's saying, I don't like what's going on here. For Jeannie, that puts a lot of tension on her because it is her sister. So it's probably very difficult for her to say, I'm sorry, sister, but you can't live here anymore. My husband won't have it. So Georgia has to look for another place to stay. Lucky for her, there's another female family member who's ready to open the door. This one's her sister, Elsie. Elsie is married to Rayborn Tanner, a well-respected member of the Malvern Police Department.
Elsie being married to a police officer and to have a knockout of a bombshell like Georgie leading him into the partying situation and not being able to control his wife's actions with her sisters, it had to have been aggravating. The three sisters were tight, Elsie, Jean, and Georgie. They were tighter than pantyhose, two sizes small.
Elsie loved this life. She's living it up, thinking this is so fun. But Rayborn Tanner really was not happy with this arrangement of these three sisters now palling around. And you know, he's hearing from people. Small towns like this, people are talking. They're saying, hey, Rayborn, saw your wife at so-and-so. So she's with her sisters again. And you know, he's probably shaking his head going, I don't want it. I told you I don't want her here. And then all of a sudden, Rayborn, who is in pretty good health, his health turned like that. Went to the hospital. He had abdominal issues, nausea and vomiting. He was in the hospital for 2 months. When he comes back home, he realizes that his finances had not been tended to, and part of the money was missing. And that's when he started getting suspicious. How did he get so sick, and was someone trying to poison him?
Could you give me a clap in front of your face real quick?
Okay.
Great. So tell me about Rayborn Tanner, who got mysteriously ill.
So where are we chronologically? We're at 69. That's when Rayborn Tanner, who was married to Elsie Plummer Tanner, fell deathly ill and spent 2 months in the hospital.
Elsie's husband got sent to the hospital under suspicious conditions that nobody knew what it was. He was a normally healthy man, just out of clear blue sky, gets sick. It's rumored that it may have been some type of poison.
During this time when Elsie's husband needed her the most, when he was in the hospital under a lot of pain, Elsie wasn't there to tend to the home. She was in fact tending to the clubs and the dog track. When he was released from the hospital, he wasn't even ambulatory. He was in a wheelchair. So when he comes back home, there was credit card debt. Someone had been ringing up. Clearly it wasn't him. And then they were behind on their mortgage. And that's when he started getting suspicious. How did he get so sick? And maybe there was a cause to his illness. He was suspicious that his wife, Elsie, was trying to poison him to collect life insurance money.
Rayborn had to file for bankruptcy. Well, you get your name in the paper when you file for bankruptcy. That's not what a member of law enforcement wants to do. And then he files for divorce.
Things settled down for the Plummer sisters, and there was about a 15, 18-year period where everybody kind of lived the stereotypical American life, whether they were buying homes or working in jobs and they were having children.
Jimmy Allen worked for the railroad. Jeannie worked as an office assistant for someone here in town.
Georgia married Darrell Weaver at this point, a construction foreman. They ended up having a child, and she worked as a telephone operator. We used to have those. She worked as a telephone operator for the Little Rock Air Force Base in Jacksonville.
What do we know about the sisters' relationship with their mother, Bertie?
Bertie, as she got older in age, needed taken care of, and that duty fell upon the siblings. Jeannie asked her mother what she wanted, and she said, well, I want you and Georgia to be in charge of my accounts and take care of her for her necessities. And they put her in a nursing home. That was when Jeannie and Georgia were starting to, pardon this, but butt heads over their mother's estate. Once the account was set up, Georgia went in and took half of it out. And Jeannie went to her and said, what are you doing? And Georgia said, well, that's my money. And she said, no, it's not. That's Mom's money. It's there to take care of Mom, and you can't have this money out of there. She actually had to go to court to force Georgia to put the money back into the account so that it could be dispersed as needed for Bertie. After that, Jeannie would not have anything to do with Georgia.
The situation with the family at this time, this is kind of late 80s. Bertie was in the nursing home, and her health starts to fail. And that's when her house burned down. Well, since Jeannie and Georgia were co-guardians of her estate, that would mean they were the beneficiaries of this claim and anything that had to do with Bertie's estate. The crazy thing was, a couple of years before this, Georgia and Daryl's home burned. And then after that home burned, they moved into a mobile home. You're not gonna believe it. The mobile home burned. So there are 3 fires kind of under Georgia's tutelage at this time in a 2-year period. What are the odds that 3 fires would happen with your name attached in about a 2-year period?
I'm just relaying on the facts as I know them. I just know there was some weird circumstances about the fire. There was suspicion about the fire, how it even took place, and who could have set it. When my grandma passed away, Jean and Georgie both were in charge of Bertie's estate. And evidently, one thought the other one wasn't getting her fair share.
Jeannie loved Georgia, but once Bertie passed, this issue of money came about. So it obviously took a toll on the relationship between the 2 sisters. Also, Jeannie's husband, Jimmy, did not like Georgia Weaver at all, which wouldn't have helped a bit.
And this is when Jimmy's going through the bank statement, seeing that there are a couple of checks totaling $2,000 that Jimmy doesn't know where the money had gone and who had written the checks. This is the first time that the tensions potentially could rise to murder.
Yes, sir.
So, tell me a little bit, why did this family fight?
Money and deaths and estates have a way of separating relationships, but after my grandma died, that was the very start of some animosity between Jeannie and Georgie.
Jeannie and Jimmy Allen had been married 46 years at this time. As we know, they had weathered a lot of storms, but the financial storms are the ones that kind of get the plumber girls every time. So when Jimmy Allen starts looking at the finances and starts thinking that somebody had been forging checks from their account, that puts a lot of tension on their marriage. And remember that Jeannie had to take her own sister to court because Georgia had made this money grab with the estate. So there are a lot of financial discrepancies going on within this family. And then Georgia's marriage to her second husband, Daryl, was falling apart, and he filed for divorce. And guess who needs a place to stay again? Georgia.
Did Jeannie immediately welcome Georgia into her home?
It seems like Jeannie was a very forgiving person, and she ended up letting bygones be bygones and let Georgie back into her life.
Jimmy was not happy to have Georgia Weaver back in their home. He knew anytime the girls got together, there could be trouble again with Georgia, and he probably always had one eye open anytime Georgia was around. Jeannie's son, Buddy, also knew that Georgia could be a little bit of trouble because she's the very person that took the small amount of inheritance from Bertie and ran off with it.
Georgia would be bad-mouthing Buddy, and Buddy would badmouth her to the point that Jeannie didn't feel comfortable. There's arguments, fighting. Georgia would actually start telling Buddy that his mother didn't want to see him. Well, he knew that wasn't true because if he were able to catch his mom was always happy to see her son. It was very tumultuous whenever Georgia was around there. Buddy was quite concerned about the welfare of his mom and his dad.
Then the police started getting involved.
One occasion, Buddy called the police thinking that his mother had abused Jimmy, her husband. Now, I don't really believe Jimmy was all that cooperative as a victim. So there wasn't a lot that can be done other than a report being documented of the alleged assault on him.
Jimmy was growing older. He would express his anger more readily. There was an incident when he brandished a shotgun. He definitely had anger problems with Jeannie. Definite dislike or flat out hatred for Georgia, not wanting Georgia at the residence.
Buddy and Georgia disliked each other so much that you never knew whether it was just Buddy trying to get back at Georgia or Georgia trying to get back at Buddy.
Then we have a call where the police get called by Jimmy. He calls the police to the house there on Twin Lakes, and he wants Georgia out of the house. He was just tired of her being in his house, tired of her taking charge of the house. And Jeannie is basically taking Georgia's side. And Georgia decides that, she'll just leave, and that would probably, in her mind, go a long way toward getting Jeannie closer to her once more. At the time, Georgia then went to stay with Sheila Simcoe, who was dating Georgia and Jeannie's brother, John Plummer. So Sheila and Georgia kind of became friends.
Georgia and Mom got really close when Georgia was staying at the house. Georgia and Mom cleaned hotels in Southwest Little Rock. They were kind of inseparable. Georgia and my mom did basically a lot, everything together. They worked together, lived together. But there was a sense of thinking that there was more going on, more behind the story of their relationship.
After things are supposedly calm, the police are called back to the house by Buddy. And once again, we have a disturbance involving Jeannie, Jimmy, and Georgia and him. And Buddy wants Georgia out of the house. And Jeannie sides with Georgia again and says, well, Buddy needs to leave. I want him to go. And it's her house, and he didn't live there, so he was the one asked to leave.
Battle lines were drawn in this family drama, but I think Georgia knew that Jeannie had a weakness for her, and she took advantage of it. Now, Buddy was the one who was on the outs. In fact, Jeannie went to the courts in Central Arkansas and said, would you please prevent him from coming back over?
During this time, Jeannie started getting ill and was in bad shape. In and out of the doctor's office, in and out of the hospital. And during that time, Jeannie did get power of attorney over Jimmy. Jeannie had this drawn up supposedly to be able to take care of Jimmy or any legal issues that would come up. There's some that believe it was a process so that Jeannie and Georgia might be able to get Jimmy out of the house and put him in a nursing home to get some money off of it.
I'm sorry, is it possible to put the cat is there a room we can put the cat in?
Yeah, honey. Come get Tallulah, please. My name is Les Blondie. I'm an attorney. I drafted the documents involved in this case. I first met Jeannie and Georgia in the fall of '92, October. Ms. Allen comes to me and says, my husband's sick. He's very ill in the hospital. Okay, what do you want me to do? Well, prepare this durable power of attorney. Okay. When Ms. Weaver was in the office, I deemed her to be a control factor. Ms. Allen, kind of timid. I could tell that Ms. Weaver was pushing this to happen. I could feel some kind of tension, or maybe just my BS meter was clicking. That Georgia had something over Jeannie. There's something going on here. I don't know what it is. There's a rat in the room. I can smell it, but I can't see it yet. Something's rotten in Denmark. Is that an old phrase? Yeah, I think something rotten in West Little Rock.
During the months of November and December 1992, Jimmy Allen's health is failing.
Georgia has left her sister's house and moved into a room at the Cimarron Motel, where she's working at the front desk. And it was during this time that, according to bank records, Jeannie empties her safety deposit box and closes her account,
which has $1,300 in it.
And store receipts show that Jeannie bought a $3,200 ring on her JCPenney credit card,
which is really out of character for Jeannie. Almost a month later, Jeannie was very ill, flu-like symptoms, nausea and vomiting, some other things.
Georgia had said that she didn't feel good either, and that she believed they had gotten food poisoning from the cafeteria there at the hospital while visiting Jimmy. Also during this, Buddy gets a phone call from Georgia. She's had to take Mom, Jeannie, to the hospital, and then she needed Buddy to come get Jimmy and take care of him, which he did. He immediately went to the house, got his dad, and took him back to his house to stay.
At the time of Jeannie's starting to get ill, there were several individuals around Jeannie that were coming down with the same symptoms. That being Buddy's daughter, who was pregnant, as well as Georgia's friend, Sheila Cinco.
Mom started getting sick in December. She couldn't keep any food down. She was hard for her to eat or drink. So Mom decided that she was ill enough to go to the hospital. She knew something was wrong. We didn't know how bad it was or how sick she was until she went to the hospital. The longer Mom was in the hospital, the more we became aware that something else might be wrong. She was getting worse. She wasn't getting better.
Sheila was very sick, and they did bring Buddy's daughter, the granddaughter of Jeannie Allen, into the hospital. So at that point, I'm thinking, how many other people are going to be ill?
Buddy would have been aware of what was going on between the two sisters fighting over money, and that would put a pretty sour taste in your mouth. So from that point forward, I don't find it unusual for Buddy to be protective of his mom and his dad against an aunt that he saw conniving over money.
Jeannie was in ICU for most of that time. She was on a ventilator. She wasn't able to speak, so they're having to breathe for her. They're doing blood transfusions. She's very ill, but we we expect her to survive this.
On January 17, 1993, the Allen family had to make a very difficult decision to switch off Jeannie Allen's breathing machine.
It's just a tragic thing, and I'm sorry for the immediate family of my cousins and uncles and nieces that I had to go through that. It's just mind-boggling, heartbreaking. Jean was the rock to all of them.
Jeannie Allen was the matriarch of the Plummer family. She was the one that everyone depended on. The doctors had no idea what was wrong with Jeannie. But then one of the other doctors ordered a heavy metals test.
There was a paralysis in her extremities. That's what I think first keyed the doctor to maybe some heavy metal poisoning. Paralysis in your hands and feet is a sign of arsenic poisoning.
When the physicians tested Jeannie Allen for any of these heavy metals, they found that she had almost 20 times the limit an adult should have of arsenic. That was obviously very suspicious, so the police were called in.
With Jeannie, the amount of arsenic was just crazy large. Very rarely that you're going to see a poisoning like that. And the levels that the doctor gave to us are too high to be some kind of accidental ingestion.
By the use of poison, it seems like a coward's way out to kill somebody. It shows me that the person who did it is a sneaky that don't have no reason to live.
Arsenic, it's a slow, silent killer. Builds up in your cells, and it's not a pretty death. Not a painless death.
I knew this family was going to be torn apart, so I felt real bad for them. There's not much more of a terrible way to go than arsenic poisoning.
The family was very distraught when they had to bury her in the family plot, knowing she had died of arsenic poisoning, but not knowing who did this.
And the person that's poisoning you is watching it. We're talking about conniving, a very active participant in the death of Jeannie Allen. That's sick. That's totally depraved. That's just short of a serial killer.
My name is Stan Wilhite. I am a crime scene technician from the city of Little Rock, Arkansas. During my career, I probably worked at least 500 homicides. This was the very first case that I had ever worked that involved possible poisoning.
Where did you start looking for the source of arsenic?
You don't really know where to start. Do you start with the food? Do you start with drinks? Or what do you start with? In this case, I think the first thing we did was look at the medication that she had. See if it was an overdose or something along that line. Other than that, you don't know what you're dealing with.
We get a search warrant to go into Jeannie Allen's home. We go into that house and we get every container that we can possibly get. We get medicines. There's a bottle of NyQuil. We get beer cans. There were sacks and sacks of beer cans, food, drinks. We emptied out the refrigerator.
According to the family, there was always a pitcher of punch that was kept in the refrigerator. Well, it turned out that the NyQuil and the punch were both just full of arsenic.
Now we know how they got the arsenic into their system. So now we need to connect that to a suspect.
At this point, Little Rock Police had two persons of interest. One is Buddy, the son of Jeannie and Jimmy Allen.
Jeannie's the one who went down to the prosecutor's office to keep Buddy away from the house.
That was one of the intriguing things about this case. A female went to the prosecuting attorney's office and filed a complaint on Buddy. That female identified herself as Jeannie Allen and alleged that there had been some domestic issues between herself and her son Buddy. So we looked at Buddy pretty close, but nothing really put Buddy in that house, and the ability to get poison into his mom. After interviewing people and looking at video and showing photos, but we could come to find out that the complaint that was filed on Buddy that was supposed to have been Jeannie was not Jeannie at all, but it turns out that was Georgia claiming to be Jeannie. So we were able to eliminate Buddy pretty quick. As we're starting to look into Georgia, we come up with all this concerning information.
At one point in time, we were able to determine that a Jeannie Allen had pawned a diamond ring that matched the exact diamond ring that had been purchased at JCPenney's that same day, but for $300 or $400. Who goes out and buys a diamond ring on your own credit card account and then pawns it hours later for cash? No one does that in their right mind.
We had somebody go out to the bank and talk to the manager that talked to this person that showed up and cleaned out the checking account and the safety deposit box. And they described the person to a T, and it was, no doubt it was Georgia.
When the bank account was closed, when the safety deposit box was empty, when the JCPenney card was used, it was all Georgia Weaver.
There's one other interesting aspect to this case that I'll tell you about. A little bit before Jeannie started to get ill, a power of attorney was written up in favor of Georgia having the power of attorney over Jeannie.
In your own opinion, do you think that Jeannie actually wrote that paper?
No. And most time, handwriting experts, they'll waffle a little bit. They'll say that, well, that it has a tendency to show that this person wrote it. This woman said, no, this was Georgia Weaver's handwriting on this power of attorney. She's evil. I'm telling you, this old woman was evil.
Georgia looks like your mom. Georgia looks like your grandmother. She could be very, very kind. She was adamant that she did not do this crime. No one saw Georgia Weaver put arsenic in the fruit punch or the NyQuil.
We have all this circumstantial evidence saying, hey, look, George is not a good person, but yet again, it's not saying, George is a killer. So we're still trying to get the evidence that'll put us over the top. Then in March of 1993, I get a phone call from the lady that owns the Cimarron Inn where Georgia worked. And she says, hey, we doing some cleaning out here, and they found a bottle of rat poisoning. And they thought it was strange because they did not use that there. And it was found in an area where they knew Georgia kept her purse and belongings when she worked there. The lab did some work on it and confirmed that arsenic in this rat poisoning was consistent with what was found in the Allen home. When we finally interviewed Georgia, it was an eye-opening experience for me. We asked her about all these little things going on. Georgia's explanation was basically that Jeannie told her to do all that. Jeannie told her to go and forge her name. We kept saying, well, why did Jeannie want you to do this? And her answer was always, I don't know. I just did what my sister told me to do. There was never a moment during that whole interview where I felt Georgia really cared what happened to Jeannie.
Georgia was always kind of the troublemaker of the family. The Plummer children would tell you, yes, Georgia had her problems, but when she was arrested for murder, that's when they were shocked. They really never thought she was capable of poisoning her own sister. Remember when Rayborn Tanner fell ill many years earlier? He had abdominal issues, nausea and vomiting. We aren't really sure what made him so sick. He was suspicious. So that was 1969. Then you fast forward these years, you've got the arsons that were never explained, these mysterious fires that insurance investigators still paid the claim on it, and Georgia ran off with the money. And then finally, we see Georgia Weaver, who loved her sister so much, come in and slowly manipulate the situation where she was trying to get in and get some money. That's all Georgia Weaver ever wanted. So she probably killed her sister because she wanted the money.
Jeannie Allen was such a sweet lady, and I think that that's what led partially to her downfall. She cared about everybody, neighbors, children, family, big time on family.
It is ironic that Jeannie, apparently from everything I've seen, loved Georgia, and she's the one that dies.
I would never have dreamed that Georgie would ever do anything like this. I feel like her mind must have snapped or something.
This case has stuck with me for so long because it was, if you will, almost like arsenic and old lace.
Seen a lot of murderers and a lot of family killing family, but I've never seen a family member put somebody through that kind of torture. I can't imagine how painful that was and how, bad of a way that was to die. The granddaughter really was tight with Jeannie. She was pregnant when she got to the hospital, and it turned out that this poisoning cost the baby its life.
That's cold, really cold.
Georgia was found guilty of capital murder May 4th of 1995. The judge gave her life without parole.
She fought to she appealed and wrote us letters. And I think one time she offered to send us cookies. And I said, I don't know if I'll eat another cookie again.
At the end of the day, I know my two aunts still love each other. Absolutely. There's no ifs, ands about it.
If you can say something to Jeannie, what would you want to say or share with her?
Just, I love you and I miss you. And I'm sorry this happened to you.
That little old lady was just as evil can be.
I don't believe God does this. Everybody forgets there's a thing roaming around called the devil. He wants to steal, kill, and destroy. And he ain't gonna be happy till he does exactly that to everybody.